Welcome everyone to the Exoskeleton Report newsletter. This is the news for week 3 of 2026, January 11th through January 17th. And as you can see, we have a ton of stories to get through. So this is an alternative version to the email newsletter because this is starting to become rather large and sizable in size. Maybe it will become more accessible if there's an audio version like this where you can just play it in the background. So let's get into it. First and foremost, I have edited quickly my recap of CES Las Vegas. I got to see 21 exoskeleton booths, or at least for devices that are either exoskeletons or exoskeleton adjacent. So that's going to be episode 30, and the podcast is only on episode 24. So by the time this episode gets released for the general public, it would have been quite some time since the CES show has taken place. So as a special thank you to all of our main tier and above members for Patreon, I have edited the podcast episode where Dr. Sugar and I go through my experience, which devices I got to try, which devices I only got to see. So I hope that this is a timely presentation for those who are interested in the state of consumer exoskeletons. And it's not too late to sign up. If you sign up right now on the Patreon channel, you will still have access to the episode. And then this is the Patreon channel. Going back to the newsletter, there's a story coming from Cyberdyne that they have entered a memorandum of understanding. And with all of these news stories, I'm always including the link to the main story right here. So if you were to click on Cyberdyne News, that will take you to the actual press release. This is from January 14th. And then I try to do my best to summarize what is it about. So in a nutshell, what I'm getting from this is that Cyberdyne has received funding from the Japanese Development of Medical Technologies program, and this is specifically for the hull lumbar. And it is showing promise for aging populations to help mobilization at the hip and at the legs, with some evidence that then that increased mobilization is preserved even when the exoskeleton is no longer being used. And spoiler alert, we will be seeing this topic a lot in this newsletter alone, and for sure many times again in the future. There's also news from LifeWard, that's the maker of ReWalk. They have entered into an agreement with a protein company, and then this gives them access to up to 47 million in investment capital, and allows them to focus moving forward on making both the exoskeleton and the treadmill technology that they acquired from AlterG to become profitable. And again, if you click on the link, that will take you to the LifeWard article. Now, there's a curious announcement from the FDA. I'll read the title. FDA announces sweeping changes to oversight of wearables and AI-enabled devices. Basically, in a nutshell, the way I see the importance of this is that consumer exoskeletons right now, not the one for skiing, but specifically the ones for hiking and for walking augmentation, walking a fine line where users are showing videos on the internet, how they're using them in the context of remobilization, but at the same time, they're not medical devices, they're consumer devices. And the way that Dr. Sugar always likes to say is that getting old should not be considered a medical condition. So with this announcement, they don't specifically mention exoskeletons or wearable robots precisely, but it seems to de-escalate the probability that the FDA would decide that something like the Hypershell, the Densys, URS Robotics, Ascentis, Sepo, one of the many other consumer exoskeletons that are now bubbling up and getting introduced, that they will suddenly find themselves to be a medical device as long as the marketing department for said companies does not make any claims that are beyond wellness, fitness, general mobility, recreational support. So they're not to be used for diagnosis, treating, medication, or rehabilitation of a medical condition, or at least marketed as such. Our Carbon Hand is a powered glove exoskeleton, and they are doing this curious experiment on Spotify where they have an AI-generated podcast. They now have 5 episodes, and it's a little bit difficult to listen to in the beginning, but it's very focused and to the point. So they're now on episode 5. They have an episode on a pilot study. And in just 4 minutes, the AI voices are able to run people through the study, and that way you have it in the background. You don't have to read the study yourself. So I think it's an interesting way. I'm not entirely sure if this is the future. I don't know if this is the future where we'll have a mix of AI and human hosts. A special thanks again to all of our Patreon supporters. It helps keep this effort alive, both this, which is the weekly newsletter, and the podcast. And the goal for the weekly newsletter is that we get lost in the day-to-day activities, and sometimes it's difficult to see that as an industry, as a field, every week we're making progress and we're getting closer and closer to making wearable robotics and exoskeleton technology mainstream and ushering in what I like to call a physical revolution. We've had the digital revolution, where we've changed how we communicate, including this video effort right now. But we haven't had a physical revolution, where we go beyond the bicycle and the wheelchair, and we leverage modern technology in order to bring new ways of thinking and new ways of approaching work or getting old, physical rehabilitation, and making it go mainstream. So thank you all for your support. Now, obviously, with the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, there's still a lot of residual coverage on that, and some of the posts are quite encouraging. So from NBC, there's an interesting quote I picked from one of the articles, and you can obviously click on it and you can see the full article here. But the gist of it is exoskeletons are shedding their bulky and sci-fi image to try and become as commonplace as smartwatches, targeting everyone from hikers to seniors seeking to stay active. So I thought that was a nice excerpt. And then there was another one by Nerdbot by Abdul Jamil. The age of the wearable exoskeleton has quietly begun. It's the fact that it doesn't ask users to adopt a new identity. You're not a patient, you're not a worker in PPE, you're just someone who wants a little extra endurance today. If wearable exoskeletons ever become as common as smartwatches, they won't start with giant robotic frames or dramatic transformations. They'll start with devices like this, foldable, intelligent, optional. So obviously this is for consumer exoskeletons. We've gone quite a bit in detail. Are they PP? Are they not? Check out the podcast. We have segments on that. There's articles on that on the website. But for the consumer side, I think that the words there make sense. There's news from University of Texas at Arlington on multi-pronged study of analyzing the conditions on fast-moving speedboats for defense and how exoskeletons can mitigate this. And this is basically a case of what was old is new again, because 20 KTS more than a decade ago tried to introduce this concept that you could use something like the ski module or a modified version of it, which is like a shock absorber for the knees, to reduce the stresses on the body and on the mariners when they're on patrol boats. Basically, the way that I understand this concept is these smaller crafts tend to bounce quite a bit on a water surface, which then sends shocks through the body of everyone who's piloting them or on them. And if it's once or twice, that's fine. But if that is your assignment, if that is your job, you do this for months or years at a time, those stresses begin to build up. So then this study is both an analysis study to look at things like, is the brain getting bruised? What is the impact on the musculoskeletal system? And then how can exoskeletons potentially alleviate some of this? So again, what was old is new again. So some time ago, I published with Matt Marino a white paper sponsored by Hypershell on the need for companies to come together and think about how they want to present data in a way that it makes sense and it gives the power to consumers to choose which exoskeleton they want to use. So I ran into a nice example today of what happens when you don't do that. And I'm not picking on Gear Junkie or Ascentis, but the article claims 35% more leg strength, 40% less knee joint wear, 30% drop in heart rate, and battery life of 31 miles. So having tried out the Ascentis, having tried out more than 100 different exoskeletons over the years, to me it seems like they took the numbers from competitors and just had it multiplied by 50% or 100%. And this is all nice and good, but eventually we want to have the consumer be able to choose between different devices. And for some people, for a lot of people, I bet, they really just want to know what is the operational range and, let's say, a light load going uphill. So 31 miles is not a realistic range under those conditions. How do we agree on how to standardize these metrics? And also, if every company has a few more percentages to the added leg strength, eventually that will catch the attention of regulators who will then say that the devices are too powerful and then they need to be treated like motorcycles or mopeds at that point in time. So food for thought. I don't have the answer to this right now. Special announcement, Bill Bellot and Dr. Matthew Dickinson have started a new podcast on exoskeletons and wearable robotics, and they will have another co-host with them soon, but for the first episode, it's the two of them. It's called Beyond the Skin. For those familiar with Dr. Bellot, he was, of course, the co-host to the excellent ExoChat, which ran for 2 years. In the first episode, it's a 30-minute discussion when a person starts losing their humanity and becomes a machine as a part of augmentation and bionics. So I think it's a good, lightweight, less scientific, more of a fun way to get the ball rolling. So check that out. It's out on YouTube. And this is Beyond the Skin, and you can click on it directly on the link if you sign up to the newsletter. And this is on the William Bellot account. Moving on, awards and recognitions. The University of Michigan has been awarded the 2025 IEEE Transactions on Control Systems and Technology Outstanding Paper Award. This is for a methodology on how the exoskeleton selects different assistive modes and timing on the controllers based on the change of conditions. So if it's stairs, if it's a ramp, if it's ascending, if it's descending. And This might seem trivial now to some, but until recently, up until 2 years ago, this was really in the realm of science fiction. For those that have seen the Cybathlon race, which is a competition to do tasks of everyday living in a medical exoskeleton as quickly as possible, like opening a door, closing a door, going upstairs, downstairs, navigating tight terrain, or moving a bowl of soup, really a chunk of time is always lost in manually transitioning between modes. The first iteration of the competition, most definitely, if you see videos of that, 30% of up to 30% of the time, the competitors putzing with their exoskeleton control, switching between modes. So this is a pretty big deal, and it's an example of adjacent technology really helping exoskeleton technology move forward, where now with AI and with models and with cheaper sensors, it has become possible and it's becoming easier for exoskeletons to be able to do mode switching on their own and be accurate. Moving on, this is a really interesting announcement from China, and I've included two sources, the China Service Trade and the Global Times. The gist of it is that new measures are being introduced to help with the quality of life of what they call the silver economy, which is their version of what's the equivalent in the US to baby boomers, basically seniors. And part of that specifically calls out exoskeletons and wearable robotics for mobility augmentation, for people that still want to stay active or to be encouraged to stay active, but need a little bit of physical support. Now, what that means financially, it's a little bit less clear from the announcement, but what I got out of this news is that it should make it easier for local governments and jurisdictions to finance implementation projects and pilot studies at the very minimum that include wearable robotics and exoskeletons for aging and senior citizens. So like I promised at the beginning, this is a topic that we'll be revisiting. Now, this is a curious article, and then this is the last article. This is from a distributor in Ukraine that thinks that as many as 200,000 hyper-powered hip exoskeletons for walking assist could be useful and implemented to the services that maintain the electrical grid in Ukraine. Obviously, that is under a lot of pressure, and there's a lot of movement and a lot of walking for the technicians to get to the areas that need fixing. What caught my attention here is that we have seen articles like this for, we think like so many exoskeletons could be used here or there. But the numbers have always been 100, 400. There was like a big announcement a couple of years ago. I think it was from IKEA that they bought 400 back support exoskeletons. I have never seen one that goes into the hundreds of thousands. Like, we think that 200,000 exoskeletons could be used for this. So in all fairness, there are definitely funds which are looking at drone and modern technology. There are definitely loans to Ukraine. This is maybe fantasy, or it could also be feasible, but I think it's definitely marks an interesting point in time where someone is comfortably putting quite a few zeros in the number of units that they think could be useful. Now, I've talked about this over the years with people, like, is it time to have an official job board? And I really don't have the answer to that, but right now what I'm doing is every time I see a job opening, I just put the link to it in the newsletter. So each one of these is a clickable, and I check on it right before I send out the newsletter to make sure that it's not a dead link or a position that has been filled. So I've noticed that there's a post-doctoral position, customer service specialist. ASTM International was looking for a person for both robotics and exotechnology, and much more. So I encourage everyone who's interested in getting a job in this field to either subscribe to the newsletter or keep an eye on the archive that I keep updated on the main website. And obviously, if you yourself have a position, an exoskeleton position, please let me know. Finally, I have a link to the next upcoming events. I think Exo Berlin Asia is next. I might be missing an event that will be happening in China that definitely will have exoskeleton deployment, but I'll have to check with Dr. Sugar on that. And then, of course, obviously, if you know of any exoskeleton-specific events, like recently, CES had at least 21 producers of exo or exosimilar technology. 3 months ago was the Exo A+A Düsseldorf. That one had 22 exoskeleton producers plus other adjacent technology around them. So the number was even higher than 22. That was fun. That was really interesting. So events like that, I try to keep in the events calendar. Check out our strategic partners, the Wearable Robotics Association, Automotive Exoskeleton Group, Modus Academy, Prime Performance, Evolving Innovation. This newsletter is received by over 1,000 people with a pretty good open rate. And again, special thanks to our corporate tier sponsors, Humotech, Uxivo, HeroWare, Digity, Hypershell, Pertezo, Crimson Dynamics, and our VIP supporters, Volker, Bartenbach, Rita Vasquez Torres, and Minmar. And if you have any questions or thoughts, my email is right here. And we also have a full media kit available if you want to advertise in this newsletter or the Exoskeleton Report website, or the podcast for that matter. And thanks for your attention. Please let me know if you like this format, because I realize that these emails are getting to be rather long, and I don't know if everybody has the energy to sit and go through all the news, or if it's entirely obvious why I think all of this is newsworthy and notable from the point of view of exoskeletons and wearable robotics. That's it for me. Have a fantastic week. Ciao.